Welcome to the launching of tutorpress.com. This is in response to the national crisis we're having in the pandemic, COVID period of life in the United States and the world, where reading levels and children's ability to learn in content areas has fallen short of what's ideal. So the website is for everyone who can help someone else learn to read, spell very well, and understand what they read. The website's very simple. The part one opens with 6 books I wrote that incorporate 64 words over and over and over and over and over and over again. Your role as the teacher of the learner, whether it's an adult speaking English as a second language, or whether it's a child, 3, 4, or 5 years old, is to have that learner memorize those 64 words. I incorporate the research I did in the last century on computers, determining those 64 words are 50% of all written language in English, no matter what whether it's the New York Times or whether it's a comic book. And if that's 50% of all language, those 64 words, what are the other 50%? Those other 50% words are called content words, or words when you close your eyes, you can see an image of it. An example would be if I said yellow rose. Yellow is a content word and rose is a content word. Now, if I close my eyes, I can see a yellow rose. A word that is not a content word is a word like to, to, or the word for. Close your eyes, you can't see to, and you can't see for. Interestingly enough, in terms of the difficulty that all people have learning English, as opposed to learning languages which spell what they sound. English does not do that. The word for, F-O-U-R, is a content word, and I'll show you why. I could close my eyes and I see for. I either see 4 fingers, or I see 4 elephants, or I see 4 cows. So that distinction of content and function is made in every one of the 6 books I authored, with the emphasis to give confidence to the person who hesitates to read fluently by having a value, a moral, a good way of behaving as the theme of each of the 6 books. That's part 1. Part 2, then, is really focusing in on how you could help the learner memorize by sight and by frequency of seeing it, those 64 words. I find the most helpful way is never have them learn it in just one. In other words, you would make a flashcard that says, this is it. This is it. And then the card would have, this is it. That is explained in part 2 of this website, which is being launched today. By the way, today is Ukrainian-Russian Christmas. They celebrate Christmas, those two countries that are at war with each other, today, January 7th, 2023. I'm Ukrainian. So, number 3 then is, after you know how these two things are put together in part 1 in these books that you'll read right now, then you go to part 2, where you will memorize with all sorts of strategies those 64 words. And you will create some content words that you enjoy. For example, maybe you enjoy ping pong. P-I-N-G, P-O-N. P-I-N-G, P-O-N-G. Okay, ping pong. And so that would be the two content words. This is ping pong. Or is this ping pong? The two content words would be ping pong. Is this ping pong? Is this is part of the 64 words that they will learn. Now let's get to the last part. And the last part of this website is part 3. Part 3 has groups. These groups, as a teacher, whether you be the parent, the older brother, older sister, or younger brother, younger sister, teaching the older brother or older sister, or the child teaching their parent who's just learning English, and the child speaks English better than the parent. Whoever you are, when you get to part 3 explains very carefully how different words can be spelled the same way and pronounced differently. Like live and live. It's spelled exactly the same, L-I-V-E and L-I-V-E, but pronounced differently. And part 3 explains sounds. Very few letters say their alphabet sound. A fact. When you see something, it usually isn't the letter C. It's S-E-E, entirely different spelling than the sound. And yet in the alphabet, a child has learned to say, this is the letter C. The sound of C actually has 2 sounds, the letter C. It has the sound of K, like in cat, and the sound of S, as in cent, a penny, a cent. So that's part 3. The last part of the website is part 4. Part 4 is an important distinction of how to really learn, how to understand what you're reading. It shares with you, the teacher, 4 groups. Study the 4 groups. And that's the overview of tutorpress.com, which you are probably the first person to watch. Happy New Year, 2023.